Hello and welcome back to another episode of 100 Yards of Football Sports Talk Radio. I'm your producer, Jeremiah Long, and joining me to talk about Alan Page, a legend from both Notre Dame and from the Minnesota Vikings, is our host, Mr. Vincent Turner, and a legend himself, and our other host, Mr. Harper LaBelle. How's it going, guys?
Wow, Jeremiah, thank you. Doing great today. How about you, Vincent?
Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Absolutely.
Well, we get to talk about Alan Cedric Page, born in 1945 on August 7th. What an amazing career that this man had. He passes his bar and finishes law school. When he passed the bar, he worked as an attorney in a prestigious firm in the Minnesota area. He was a special assistant to the Attorney General in 1985. He was then appointed as an Attorney General. And then in 1992, he was an Associate Justice to the Minnesota Supreme Court. Oh, wait a second. We're talking. Oh, he's also played some pretty dang good football, Vincent. We don't want to dissuade anybody in thinking this isn't a brilliant man in terms of his intellect and his ability to serve the public. But my goodness, his football career is one of the main reasons that we want to talk about him, even though he became a prestigious lawyer and it became a part of the Minnesota Supreme Court. Alan Page, what an amazing life this man has led.
When you look at Alan Page, the first memory of him is that he played defensive tackle, and I want to know how much did he weigh? Because it always seemed like, I believe he played at 245, 250. And it was the quickness of him playing defensive tackle that stuck out of my mind. And think about his journey. Mother passed when he was 13 years old. Had a hell of a father that kept him focused on education. But I always go back to first memory of Alan Page, 6 years old, the game of the century, Notre Dame and Michigan State. Everybody coming into that game talking about that mammoth of a man, the monster of the man, Mr. Bubba Smith in that football game.
Yep.
Jimmy Ray, Clint Jones, George Webster, the number one ranked team in the country, Michigan State. But on the other side of the ball, everybody was talking about Terry Hanratty, the quarterback in Notre Dame, and Jim Lynch, the linebacker, who went on and played with the Kansas City Chiefs. But nobody was talking about Alan Page. And in that second half, go back and watch the game, because you can go on several media outlets and look at the game live from play to play. Alan Page was a big man in the second half. And that was my memory of starting to really follow Alan Page. And then, of course, him playing with the Minnesota Vikings, the Purple People Eaters, Jim Marshall, Carl Eller, Gary Lawson. And Alan Page seemingly always took his game to another level in the playoffs. And them Vikings in their uniforms, wearing them black cleats, that used to irk me, especially when they beat the Dallas Cowboys. And it seemingly he played his best when the money was on the line. And think about this. When we go back and we talk about old school defensive tackles, Bob Lilly name is mentioned, Marilyn Olsen name is mentioned, Buck Buchanan, Joe Green, and Randy White. But seemingly nobody puts Alan Page in that elite company. It's always that he's been a great player, but he's never put up there among the stones all the great defensive tackles that's played in the National Football League. And I'm going to give it to you, Harper. The one stat of memory I'm going to think about Alan Page. And think about this today on 100 Yards of Football. He's the only defensive player to win MVP in 1971 outside Lawrence Taylor. As we speak right now, he's the only MVP on the defensive side of the ball outside Lawrence Taylor. Back to you, Harper.
Special man indeed. Grew up in Canton, Ohio, and in high school, he ended up having a summer job where he actually worked on the construction of the NFL Hall of Fame, the building site. He did some work there when he was just a young boy. But he ended up playing well enough at high school. He was a good football player for obvious reasons. He had great size, he had great speed, his strength, and he gets recruited to play at the University of Notre Dame. And because both of his parents stressed education, obviously Notre Dame would be a great place to say, you know what, even if football doesn't pan out, I would like the degree, I would like the education that Notre Dame has to offer. Well, he plays well enough there to be a part of one of the great games of all time. And even though in 64, they finished third, there were some that said they got a couple of votes for being national champions, but it wasn't until 1966 that Notre Dame was named the outright champion of the NCAA that year. So his football experience at high school and then at Notre Dame really taught him how to be a winner, how to do things differently, how to be better than everybody else. And because of that education aspect of it, even when he was drafted in the first round, number 15 overall to the Minnesota Vikings, there would be times in the summers where he and then with his wife, they'd make a decision that he would take some classes during the offseason and work on what his life would be after football. But what an amazing football career that he had, playing for Bud Grant, getting in 4 Super Bowls. Even though they lost all of them, he got to play in 4. And he was a part of a trivia question that I always ask people. I go, name the 3 NFC teams that ended up playing in the Super Bowl. There were only 3. There were 7 that played from the AFC. If you include the Baltimore Colts, remember they were also in the NFL, and then they moved over to the AFL or the AFC back in the early 70s. But the 3 teams, Washington, people forget the Redskins, and then the Dallas Cowboys and the Minnesota Vikings ended up being 4 times in that decade Super Bowl representatives. You mentioned the Purple People Eaters. Goodness gracious, all the teams that had great nicknames, the Orange Crush, the Doomsday Defense, the Steel Curtain, the no-name defense that the Dolphins had. There was a real interesting dynamic in the names that people were giving to the defensive line and their ability to get to the quarterback. His speed and his ability to maneuver through traffic was unprecedented. A small tackle, if you don't mind me saying so. You mentioned he was about 240, 245 pounds. One of the reasons he got cut by the Vikings near the end of his career, he loved to run. He ran a marathon and has probably trained for many others, but that would keep his weight down. And the Vikings wanted him to get bigger and faster and heavier, but he just wanted to keep that pace, and he couldn't do it when he was running long distances at that weight. So that was one of the little things that stuck out in my mind about, how stick-to-itiveness really does play in his life. I'm going to study harder. I'm going to do things my way, and may even be a little bit stubborn. But Vincent, some of the great Super Bowls that he got to be a part of. The first one against the Kansas City Chiefs and going against that amazing offense that they had, playing against the Dolphins that was in Tulane Stadium, and then playing against the Steelers. Oh my goodness, there was times where you just say, gosh, the Vikings are so close to winning a championship. Do you think that if he had a Super Bowl ring, just one, even though he went 4 times, that would have a different outlook on the status that he has compared to some of the other greats?
Of course. Yeah. I think if he had even one Super Bowl ring, we might be talking about him being the best defensive tackle that's played ever in this game. There's no question about it. Unfortunate that didn't happen, but my respect for him as a defensive tackle, at the way he played, it goes to levels that you don't even understand. Look at the tackles that we have playing now. Even in the game last night, Dallas and Tampa Bay. Our average D tackle is what, 315, 320, and can move with ability. This guy did it at 245 pounds. And granted, it might have not even been at 245. Think about it. And the one stat that I'm going to take from his career, he played in 218 consecutive games. 218. That's saying a lot there, man. And then he blocked 23 kicks. Back to you, Harper. I don't have to say no more.
Yeah. 215 of those were as a starter. There were 3 times that he had to come in off the bench, but he did get in 218 consecutive football games at that level and not missing no matter what. Injuries and bumps and bruises that come in, a lesser player would not be able to do that. one of the things that I looked up that really amazed me back in those days, the game was changing because the venues were changing. In the division, when the Vikings first started in 1961, they were actually an AFL team, but in 60, and in 61 they moved over to the NFL, and that worked out quite well for them. By 1961, they had just finished construction of Metropolitan Stadium, and the Twins had gone from a city that really supported double and triple A ball to where they had a major league club, and they got to the World Series. They weren't the best team, but boy, they drafted well. A lot of players that were through the Twins organization that ended up making it at an all-star level and eventually into the Hall of Fame, but some got traded to other teams. But 1961, so the Vikings play in Metropolitan Stadium. Who can't think of at least one great memory that they had when they get to watch games and you see the players and you know it's freezing cold from a football perspective in January. It's playoff football. You can see the players' breath. It's either snowing or you can just tell how cold it is. You see guys shivering. The Vikings never had any of those gas heaters. They weren't allowed to do it. They weren't allowed to wear gloves. When you stop to think about it, Bud Grant was so strict about that. But I'm sure you had some great memories. The first Hail Mary took place in the stadium. We're looking at the picture in the upper middle, Vincent. So many amazing games that took place in Metropolitan Stadium there in the early 70s.
You brought up some great memories, man, and some great images of us remembering Metropolitan Stadium. But what sticks out to me most of all, Harper, and this is what I look at it. Think about if this was happening right now, even in college football and professional football. Both teams on the same side of the field.
Yep.
That's my most fondest memory. Both teams on the same side of the field. That is marvelous right there. Think about if we had that right now, Ohio State and Michigan being on the same side of the field, what happened a couple of weeks ago. Think about even right now, the competitive game between the Washington Commanders and the Philadelphia Eagles yesterday. You talking about hands flying? You talking about coaches getting into it? It'd have been something to see. That's one point that I'm always going to take to my grave. Both teams, when you played Minnesota and Metropolitan Stadium, they was on both sides, the same sidelines. Back to you, Harper.
Yeah, the construction of the stadiums had a weakness in terms of being able to. The great thing was that they were able to have dual sports. You had football and baseball, and a surge of stadium changes occurred all throughout the country, where Oakland, San Diego, Atlanta, St. Louis, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, New York with Shea Stadium, even though it was a slightly different design, they all had the ability to have football and baseball in the same building. And basically, you could just within a few hours, you could reconstruct your interior of the stadium to house either or. And it happened a lot. Metropolitan Stadium was multi-purpose. It was an outdoor grass stadium. So usually by the end of the year, the Twins would complain about how beat up their field was. But the Vikings, my goodness, and they were a part of a division that back in those days, when the Bears moved from Wrigley Field to Soldier Field, they went from both teams on the same sideline to being able to be on different sidelines. Metropolitan Stadium, when the Packers played in Milwaukee Stadium, it was the same thing. And then Tiger Stadium, for whatever reason, everyone in that conference, the 50-yard line was the barrier. And if you were on one side or the other, it was an opponent who was literally right next to you. You couldn't have a whole lot of secret discussions. If any volume at all, the other folks could hear you. But what an amazing time and place for that. But Alan Page's career and his involvement in some of the great playoff games of all time, whether it be in Metropolitan Stadium or in Los Angeles or against the Dallas Cowboys when they played at Texas Stadium. Certainly the uniforms. I love the gold uniform the gold that was on the shoulder of the purple stripes that they had on the road uniform, which was different from the stripes that were on the sleeve that they had for the home jerseys, their helmet, of course, and obviously his prowess. He had 148 and a half sacks. You mentioned all of the block kicks that he had, fumble recoveries, interceptions. He had one for a touchdown. Alan Page certainly had an amazing NFL and college career.
I think when you look at a guy that we can look at and said that he did it both ways. Notre Dame, prestigious school, graduated from there in political science. Then after his career, he kind of really had a plan and became one of the top lawyers in the metropolitan Minneapolis area. And, I don't have to say no more. Voted to the Supreme Court Justice in the state of Minnesota and receiving the medal from President Donald Trump. Well, what can you say, man? He's had a career that a lot of us dream of. And he did it quietly. Think about, he was a player on the National Football League at another level. One guy that wasn't a guy that said, look at me, I'm doing this over here. I need to really be honored. He went on, had his career quiet. Think about this. Quiet in Notre Dame, All-American, national champion, quiet with the Minnesota Vikings, wins 4 Super Bowls. Then, after his playing career, he takes his other life, academia, to another level and becomes not only a great attorney and a great judge, but a judge on the international level. He's respected, maybe as much as playing football. He's respected playing with the Vikings. But his other career, he's respected on the international level. I think that's a pretty good life, Mr. Harper LaBelle. I think that's a life that God looks down and says, touchdown, Jesus. While Alan Page went to Notre Dame, baby. Back to you, Mr. Harper LaBelle.
Yeah, I could see a lot of people saying, well done, my good and faithful servant. At Notre Dame, he wins the national championship. He's a first rounder in the 1967 NFL draft. He's an NFL champion in 69. He's the most valuable player. Again, as Vincent mentioned, just one of 2 players to ever win an MVP from a defensive side. He was a defensive player of the year twice in 71 and in 73. He was a first team All-Pro 5 times, second team All-Pro 3 times. He went to the Pro Bowl 9 times. He's a member of the 100th anniversary all-time team in the National Football League. He was in the all-decades team of the 70s. He's in the all Minnesota Vikings 25th and 40th anniversary teams. He's in the Ring of Honor. His number has been retired. He was a 2-time champion in many different ways. 3 safeties, 2 interceptions, 148 and a half sacks. He's a member of the College Football Hall of Fame and the National Football League Hall of Fame. And as you can see in the upper right corner, in 2018, he's a recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. What more can we say about an amazing human being, a fantastic judge, fantastic lawyer, an individual who is beyond compare, but a guy that we're going to honor today as being a great football player. We thank Alan Page for all of his contribution to mankind. What an amazing individual, and it's our honor to be a part of recognizing him here today on 100 Yards of Football. So on behalf of Jeremiah Long, our producer and engineer, our host, our founder, Vincent Turner, thank you so very much for being a part of this. Go ahead, Vincent, please.
Yes, before we end today, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, Harper, I think we need to say something from a different sport, and I'd like you to give your final thoughts on Ricky Henderson passing yesterday.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Ricky loved himself, but you know what? He deserved so much of the attention. Probably the greatest leadoff hitter that any manager at any time would say, my roster would be better if we had Ricky Henderson leading off for us. It's not just the steals. It's the attitude of we're going to do everything we can to win. And Ricky was absolutely a winner in so many different respects. And thoughts and prayers obviously go out to his family and the surviving members of the Hendersons. But man, their dad, their brother, their husband, their friend in Ricky was a fantastic baseball player. So thank you very much for bringing that up. And yes, we lost a good one.
Ricky Henderson, kudos, my man. I never thought anybody would break Lou Brock's record in stolen bases. You've done it. Much respect to you, into your family. Many prayers and blessings to the Henderson family. Back to you, Harp.
Yes, absolutely. And so great sadness in the world of baseball with Ricky's passing. And our honoring of Alan Page will continue forever. We greatly appreciate all that he did and his contribution to the NFL, to our justice system, and to mankind. Like I said, congratulations, Alan. Thank you so very much for staying with us, ladies and gentlemen. We greatly appreciate it. So for Jeremiah Long, our producer engineer, for Vincent Turner, I'm Harper LaBelle. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. This is our Legends show where we get to honor great players from the past. Today it was on Alan Page. We thank you for tuning in. Have a fantastic day, everybody, and Merry Christmas to all.